Hello, everyone, to yet another episode of the Digital Adoption Show. Today, we are diving deep into a discussion critical for the success and ever-evolving L&D landscape. It will be a free masterclass on the upskilling and reskilling your workforce. I am your host, Neha Smriti, growth marketing manager at WhatFix. This episode promises to be a game changer, equipping you with the knowledge to future-proof your organization and empower your employees. To guide us through this dynamic conversation, we have assembled a dream team. First, we have Dr. Hannah Gore, a titan in the L&D, HR, and recruitment world with a staggering 25 years of experience. Hannah's impressive resume includes leading a business school across 93 countries, working with industry giants, and creating content for a whopping 10 million learners globally. Currently, she is the head of people at Quakerelli Simmons, recently recognized as top 100 most loved workplace in the UK. Joining her is the brilliant Teresa Rose, an award winning learning and performance consultant and the founder of Consult Her Limited. Teresa brings over 15 years of expertise in organizational and people development, tackling everything from program design to large scale global change initiatives. Her impressive client list includes prestigious names like DNB, the World Bank, Deutsche Bank, and GSK, to name a few. Hannah and Teresa, welcome to the show. We are really excited to have you. And to start the discussion, before we jump to the questions, we would love to know your journey in the L&D space. Teresa, why don't we start with you this time?
I've had quite a squiggly journey to where I am today, which started as an antique dealer at the age of 17, which not a lot of people know that that's something I used to do, and I did that for 7 years. And once I stopped doing that, I went to work in retail management for some high street brands, Dunelm being one of those, the soft furnishings company, if you've heard of them.
Mhm.
And then I went into sales, and I worked in media and educational technology sales for 10 years, working my way up to head of UK sales. The company was acquired by a US owner, and they didn't know what they were doing from the people point of view, dealing with the closure of an organization and all of the HR side. So I found myself dealing with that and enjoyed it. I thought, oh, I think I'll take this on as my new career. Took my redundancy and did my master's in HR whilst working on an interim basis to build up some knowledge and expertise, and that included HR generalist role in the back of a group. And then I went to work for Eon, where I was there for 10 years and touched everything from learning design through to 3 years working in a global role on their digital transformation, and spent a lot of time doing research on how people learnt at work and what we needed to do to make that offer far more effective and modern and up to date, and got to trial and experiment with a lot of different ways of learning and social learning and things like that when they were quite early on the scene. And after 10 years there, I took voluntary severance, and for the last 5 years I've been working as a self-employed consultant with different names, the ones that you mentioned in the intro.
Great to meet you, Teresa. And actually, you have had such a journey. You have covered all the different themes that we usually host on our show. So we have digital transformation, we have HR, we have L&D, and you have covered base with everything. So you will have some great insights to share today. I'm looking forward to it. Over to you, Hannah. Tell us more about you and your journey.
Yeah, so my journey started 25 years ago next year, so big celebration for me there. I started out also in sales, but in a very strategic way. My family are either business people or education people, and so I'm the hybrid of the family. And so I started out working in sales, but as a business improvement team leader, teaching people how to sell better, understand their clients better, train them to make sure that we're giving the best possible customer service, but of course, most importantly, the return of investment. I then, interestingly, did a squiggle, as Teresa would call it, into the prison service, where I worked in employment litigation for 3 years, which was a very interesting time. And also working as well in health and safety training there, which anyone who's done health and safety training knows that is a difficult training to make exciting at times. I then jumped into the Open University for 13 years, and that was an exciting time working in cutting edge technologies, and we used to deliver content to 10 million learners worldwide, which when you see that kind of data behind the scenes is phenomenal. We got to work with Amazon, Apple, really cutting edge kind of technologies and learning designs, working in the very, very infancy of MOOCs when they came out all those years ago. And from that, I was asked to join a company called Solera, which is one of these companies that no one's ever heard of, but everybody uses. And I got to deliver their talent development. I was head of talent development there for a few years until COVID came. So I used to work across 93 countries there, which was very exciting, building everything in their business school from scratch, based on everything that I had learned and studied in my doctorate whilst I was at the Open University. Then I worked during the COVID years for myself for a number of different companies, helping them understand their learning and development, their HR needs, recruitment needs, etc. And then I joined Quacquarello Symonds, which has been absolutely fantastic. Again, a real opportunity to make a difference in a people-first organization. I've developed their 3-tier leadership program, which is actually open entry, which is exciting. You don't have to be a manager. You don't have to have a secret handshake to get on it, which is super important to me to make sure, you know, that we're really developing absolutely everybody. And then along the way, different podcasts, conference presentations, and I also write for the HR Zone and the Training Zone as well. So it's been a very exciting time. I've got to see so many different things like Teresa along the way, see technologies evolve, how our ways of working with those technologies have evolved, right from learning design to actually the technology design and development, all the way through to delivery. I used to also lecture for the Open University on their MBA program. So I've literally done every single job along the way like Teresa, and I think that helps us with our holistic thinking. So we definitely have a much more rounded view of the world when people are talking to us about their learning needs.
Amazing, amazing. As I was saying, both of you had a slightly different trajectory, but both of you have an entrepreneurial journey also. Plus, now we are joining in for an L&D episode. So yeah, totally looking forward to the episode. So yeah, to kick off the episode, I have the first, like the whole flow of the show would be we are going to ask you 3 different questions, and we'll try to pack all the insights and all the information around those 3 questions. So that's the idea. So my first question for you both today is, how exactly can we identify when our workforce needs upskilling or reskilling, like reskilling versus upskilling? Like what would be your major key indicators these organizations can watch out for, and how can both, like when it comes to upskilling or reskilling, be strategically implemented to address the changing job market demands? We can start with Teresa on this.
Ooh, where do I start on this? There's a lot to unpack there and a lot to say. Data, that's the first thing that comes to my mind around this, is what data and insights have you got that tell you that there is either a reskilling or an upskilling need? And with that data, are you also testing or disproving that hypothesis? Because you might think that there's a certain problem, but is it the real problem that you think you have? Is it just purely the presenting problem? A bit like going to the doctor. You might have a problem or a symptom and the doctor treats it, but it's not the underlying problem. And it's very similar when you're presented with reskilling and upskilling, and the differences between those and what your strategy and approach might be. I've been talking a lot about skill segmentation and thinking about the BCG matrix, if you're aware of that. So what skills are deriving the most value for you? What are the disruptive skills, the problem child? What skills are you finding a causing failure demand in your organization to your customers? What data have you got about your customers as well, and what they need and want? So it's about gathering that data initially and looking at that data to derive insights. So you can have as much data as you want, but if you're not gathering the insights and then making the decisions and taking the actions, you're not going to get anywhere. And you will be, and it's not about opinions either, though they might come into it a little bit in terms of, I've got an opinion that we need to do this. What's the data and the insights telling you? And if you've got gaps, then gather more data and do that fact finding before you start to make investments in learning programs that might be on future skills or things like that, because somebody thinks it's a good idea to do it because there's a report from the World Economic Forum that says we should be doing these top 10 future skills, but they don't have any relevance to your organization, they don't give a purpose to your people, and they don't serve customers and generate value and income. So that is my long short answer on that.
Amazing, amazing. Hannah, over to you. We would love to listen to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, like with Teresa, I mean, I could talk about data all day long. It's a big love of Teresa and mine. For me, it's building on what Teresa is saying. There's a lot of L&D people out there who are absolutely fantastic at L&D, and they can answer any pop quiz on L&D technologies that are available in learning, different ways of designing, etc. They're absolutely fantastic. But if you give them a pop quiz about the industry that their company that they work for is in, they may not do as well. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of what Teresa was saying about understanding the data of the customers, understanding the industry that they are in. It is not just about, as Teresa was saying, you know, these are the top 10 skills that LinkedIn say that we need. Okay, great. But what industry am I in? You know, that top 10 could be a completely different order based on the industry that I'm in. So I've worked with clients before that are in, you know, the accountants industry, the banking industry. You know, these have different needs, different skills, and you've really got to understand your company, the industry that it's in, its 5-year goals, to really understand the difference between the upskilling and reskilling. So with the upskilling, it's about obviously refining the skill set that you already have, potentially getting some new skills, but on your existing role and responsibility. And that role and responsibility may evolve slightly over the years, you know, as the technology enhances, as it upgrades. Now that's still upskilling, but reskilling is brand new technology, brand new ways of working. So for example, the advent of AI, that's a reskill. Absolutely. That's not an upskill. It wasn't there a couple of years ago. You know, if you're using SAP and SAP comes out with a new upgrade, that's an upskill.
Yeah.
And so if they bring out a brand new AI platform, that's a reskill. So I think a lot of companies need to understand the difference between the two, because they use the term intermittently and they can two completely different things. So I think that's super important. It's also important to understand where the position is inside the industry, understand where your CEO wants your company to be. So that is really important, because you've got to upskill your people now and reskill them for the future. Yeah. So if your CEO wants you to be in a position in a certain market share in 5 years' time, then you've got to look at a skills gap analysis for all employees. And so it's something that we do at QS. We look at the skills that our people have. It's something I did in Solera. So it's the skills that all the employees in Solera had, all 7,000 of them. And it's all skills I'm looking at, not just the skills for the roles, because I need to know where to position them in the future. So if they've got hidden skills, I need to know to unlock them in the future and work out, where does the CEO want to be? And then work out where that gap is. So that gap is going to move continually thanks to the rapid pace of technology. And they've got to understand, where do those training initiatives slot into those gaps? Where are the priorities? So where is the top 10? In what order is that top 10? And it's really understanding the business objectives of your organization to get to the heart of that, and then create those learning opportunities based on those needs. And it's not a case of one size fits all. So what you see at a conference that worked for such and such may not work for you. But it's finding that happy mix of like an ecosystem of different things that are going to work for different types of skills or different types of environments. So say, for example, my CEO, she would want to have us, AI experts within X number of years. I have to start that today to make sure that they're experts by the time that we get to that goal. Yeah. So it's understanding that these 5-year plans that these CEOs have, you have to start today to get them to pivot, to move that ship, to get them there. And then, most importantly, continually evaluate that data, because things move, things change. As we've seen with the birth of AI, how rapidly that organization shift has happened inside so many organizations, that you have to constantly reassess what's happening in the future. And it's not just how our industry works, it's how our clients work inside that industry. And you have to keep moving. So really, the upskill, reskill, it is an everyday piece. Every single year, you're going to have to be reworking that. It's not a, oh, here's my 5-year plan, see you in 5 years. You know, this is, as Teresa was saying with the data, it's a continual piece.
So it's like looking within your own organization, your team, your own workforce need. Like I totally second Teresa's point on data, because I was having a conversation similar to yours, and where they were talking about, based on their organizational needs and the data point, they would define the L&D initiatives for each individual, because it's more about personalization also. Plus, I also second, like it totally depends on the kind of industry, the kind of challenge that you're facing. Say, for example, my company tomorrow changes the complete CRM tool. It will be more of a reskilling when it comes to a new CRM, right? And if I see, based on all the data points, that my current employee is not able to utilize that CRM tool, that existing CRM tool today, it will be more of an upskilling. Like we need to make them understand how to exactly use it, which even our company does. But yeah, it's more about, based on the use case basis, you're totally going towards whether you're going for upskilling or reskilling. It totally depends on the use case and need basis. Great, amazing. So to actually follow up on that question again, there's another theory, like to foster a culture of continuous learning, it's very important, like it's actually very important when it comes to upskilling or reskilling. Like you need to have that kind of a culture across your organization, right? And since you would have tackled such large scale change projects yourself, what are some of the effective strategies the organizations can actually adopt to foster that kind of culture, where you encourage employee participation, you kind of encourage upskilling and reskilling, because it boils down to how your company is actually taking the whole process of upskilling and reskilling. We can start with Hannah.
Right. So for me, it's the culture really starts weirdly with the performance review piece. And so you kind of work backwards from there. And so many times when you go in for your annual reviews and your mid-year reviews, they go, oh, here are your objectives. And they're all work-based. And then they go, do you need any personal development on that? Or sometimes they don't mention it at all, and you feel that you have to talk about it. The problem with that is that you're already on the back foot as an employee, because you're thinking, I've just agreed to do all these objectives, and no one's talking actually about upskilling or reskilling.
Yeah.
And there's not any professional development section in a lot of end of year, mid-year reviews, or it's right down at the bottom. And it is in the wrong place. So if you really want a culture of learning, and a real pull culture, push culture, so you're working on both types of culture, where it's top down, bottom up, people pulling and wanting it, people pushing it out there as well. So this is like the happy medium. And to do that, you have to talk about professional development at the top, not talk about the objectives. So we're actually saying, you know, we really want to upskill you. We really want to reskill you. We're going to have some exciting things coming this year. And we want to talk about your development first. Imagine a world where we talk about that first, and then we talk about the objectives. The objectives then seem very, very different to how they were if we talked about them at the top, and then talked about professional development at the bottom. So already you're adopting this mindset whereby you're like, yes, like I've got all the tools I need. My line manager is really behind my development. I feel like I've got the space to do it. But this is positively encouraged to achieve my objectives. Instead of what normally happens, which is we talk all about the business, and then if you're lucky in some organizations, you get to talk about your personal development. But it's very much seen then as a weakness. You know, I've agreed to everything, and now I'm saying, actually, I could do with some help here. So in promoting that growth mindset, we have to move everything and flip everything around and create these spaces whereby one is positively and re-encouraged to get the objectives done, that we have an encouraged growth mindset, that we create spaces to allow people to learn in lots of different ways. So, for example, in my team, we have daily scrums. We talk about everything we're working on that day, and it's a constant moving agile piece. But we also have 3 times a week show and tell, different members of staff on different days, show and tell something they've learned, seen, done, etc., to the rest of the team. So they're doing micro learning, they're doing their own kind of facilitated learning, they're presenting it, we're talking about it, we're seeing how it works. We've got a constant learning dialogue inside teams where we're going, oh, have you seen this? And we're working on that and what's happened over there. And so there's this constant environment that everyone can ask questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. You know, if you need help, it's always available within the team. If we don't know the answer, you know, some new law has come out, well, we're going to go off and go investigate it. We all read up on it and we discuss it a little bit like a reading circle, you know. And so it's establishing this kind of environment with line management support, advocating the importance of it, bringing in different things from the outside world, and importantly, recognizing those achievements as they happen. Like, that was an incredible presentation. I can totally see how your preparation has really paid off there. I love the way that you presented this, you know, like really reinforce it, not just save it then for the mid and end of year reviews. And then people really feel like this is a great place for me to develop my skills. This is a really good opportunity. And so my team then, as a result, ask all the time, you know, can I do this? Can I do that? And this is fantastic. And this is where we get that real learning culture that so many companies talk about having, but it's more like lip service because they've got LinkedIn Learning or they've got an LMS or any other platform with an acronym to it. You know, it's not enough. It's not, if we build it, they will come. It doesn't work that way. So for me, that culture has to come from within the management and from within the structure, and then it develops. I get very passionate about that part. Continuous learning is an obsession of mine. So yeah, I think it comes really down to hard processes.
Hannah, I can see you are so passionate about continuous learning. We could see that. And we had some great insights. To Teresa, I was asking, like, even when you kind of doing the job for other companies, you would be looking at like there's a whole culture which needs to be redefined for them, for the employees to feel a certain way where they are like kind of being upskill or reskill. And to add another angle to it is um, there's this individual ownership also comes into picture, and I feel it's equally important. How exactly can we empower employees to take this ownership in tangent with kind of improving the culture of continuous learning? So what's your take on it?
Okay, several different angles here, and I echo what Hannah's said, particularly around the system and creating those conditions for learning to happen and something to be done with that learning as well. You could have lots of learning going on, as Hannah said. You might put a LinkedIn Learning or whatever that might be, and a lot of the time that's purely content consumption, and people will go on there and there's lots that's useful to them, but how useful we often don't really know. So there's an equation that I like to use, which is from the work of Boxall and Purcell, and they looked at the necessary factors that are needed for performance to occur, and that equation is performance equals the function of the ability, so that's the skills you have, the motivation, but also the most important thing that the organisation can provide is the opportunity for people to be able to use those skills. So with those in place, then you create the conditions for learning, and often that opportunity is hung around a purpose of the organisation. So a lot of what Hannah's talked about is that learning's being done for a purpose, whether that's a larger purpose or a team purpose, but there's normally a big idea that the organisation's working towards that encourage all of those factors to be in place and those conditions to be in place. And I've worked with organisations maybe on large projects where we've put those conditions in place, and it takes time. It requires sponsorship from senior leaders. It requires the looking at workflows and the work that people do and where learning takes place there. It also requires doing with rather than doing to, and that's where I always have the most success, and it's something that I get a lot of joy out from my work when I'm working inside the business and can get to talk to people and really work with stakeholders and uncover what's going on. Going back to my earlier answer is what's the presenting problem, but what's really going on. You think this is the problem, but what's really going on under there when I start to lift the bonnet and uncover and talk to people. So I've done a lot of research in, I did a lot of research in E.ON that I mentioned, but I've also done quite a lot in client organisation. And that can often be a challenge as well when you're presenting that information to senior stakeholders and you're kind of holding a mirror up to them, and it's things that, you know, at first they find that they don't believe. It's like, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But then when we start to look at the other data that they have and it links to that equation. So something I did with DNV is we were looking at the architecture, the routine and the culture that was required for them to enable the organisation to digitally transform. This was pre-COVID. And all of the work that we did and the data that we gathered, and then the blended approach, but also very work-led approach that we put in place, and the involvement of a large swathe of the organisation resulted in, when COVID hit, they were able to pivot their organisation because we'd upskilled them and reskilled in certain ways. Before that word was being used so much as it is now, those words were being used so much, to be ready and to keep that organisation afloat during really difficult times. And they would have been a legacy organisation that had been around for over 100 years. And having worked in digital transformation on a legacy organisation before, I know what a huge shift and change that is. But they were very successful, and it's because it had all of those needed conditions in to enable it to be successful.
I actually totally second that. Like, once you told that even before COVID hit, because most of the transformation started happening right after pandemic, right? But because you had kind of upskill and reskill the workforce, they were able to take it at a snap of a finger. Like, even with all the challenges that pandemic brought to us, they were able to do it. So it just shows how important it is. And plus, I totally second your point on kind of justifying it to your senior stakeholders. That can be challenging a lot of times, because you are wanting to say, for example, you're trying to kind of upskill your team, but to justify it to senior stakeholder why it is needed, what will it like give you in return, is actually challenging, and that kind of brings it to the success. So thanks a lot. My next question to you both is, you actually were talking about a success story, so we would love to know some other story of execution. I am really sure both of you would have either implemented or seen across your organization some successful upskilling and reskilling initiatives. And we would love to hear one or two of those stories, and what was a challenge that the team was facing or the organization was facing, and how were you able to kind of bring that whole initiative into place. We can start with Teresa.
I'm going to use an example from when I was at E.ON, and it was a project called People Management at E.ON, which I led, and I worked on that for about 18 months to 2 years. And the organisation was going through a transformation of HR, which involved much more ownership of the line managers. So it was a devolved model of people management towards the line manager, and a reduction in support from HR. And as a result, it meant lots of new ways of working for them. So I again did my approach that I like to do, which is gathered lots of data from different places and used very much an organisational development mindset around it. So looked at a diagnostic, lots of contracting as well, which is really important. You don't hear a lot about that. And we were talking about stakeholders, but a real key part of organisational development is contracting with your stakeholder and getting agreement and recontracting if new things appear that you discover. If you don't keep contracting, then that's when things start to go awry. And I then got the managers and the colleagues involved. So I did a lot of work of doing with, creating with, co-creating. And we designed this concept called People Management at E.ON, which was the whole people management life cycle, all of the activities that they needed to do. In the early days, before curation was talked about, I curated all of the content to put it in one neat place for the managers. But we also had behavioural indicators, which they wrote. They weren't a competency model that HR had written in their tower and then put out to the managers. It was their language, and it was the colleagues' language. and I did prototypes before people were talking about prototypes, got them to test it and sign it off. And their language was used in terms of what they wanted to see from managers and leaders and what they didn't want to see. So as well as it being a place for them to go and work in new ways, it was also a way to look at how they behaved around those new ways of working as well, and that colleagues and managers could hold them to account to. And then I was monitoring all the data on that and the uptake. I was doing lots of campaigns around it. So I was working with a comms partner. So it was everything around it to ensure that it was embedded. Because another thing that we tend to do in our profession is we tick the box once it's done. But then I was having to make sure it was becoming business as usual and used and embedded into ways of working. And I've got the data and could then do the updates to it in the iterations as people gave me feedback as well as to how well it helped them to do their jobs. So that would be one of my examples to show you.
Great story there. And Dr. Gore, why don't you tell us one of your anecdotes of successful implementation?
Yeah, I think it would have to be my latest piece that I've been working on at QS, which is our 3-tier leadership program. It is something I am profoundly proud of for a number of different reasons. So when I worked at the Open University, it's a open entry barriers university. So you don't need any school qualifications to start to learn a degree. It's very much there is no position that would stop you from going in. And I wanted a leadership program that emanated that. And so many organizations have leadership programs, but you have to be of a certain level, or you have to be in the company for so many years, or you have to have the secret handshake or the special invitation. And there's so many layers to it. And I don't understand why we are gatekeeping leadership skills, because every single company desperately needs good leadership skills. So why do we gatekeep them? And so what I wanted to do was create a program that was completely open entry, that had this tiered progression. So if you aren't a manager, you don't have any direct reports right now, you would start on Emerge. And you can nominate yourself. Your line manager doesn't have to nominate you or anything like that. You can just nominate yourself, register yourself, and join. And then you have Emerge, which is Advanced, which is designed for people who have line management capabilities and direct reports right now. And then you have Propel, which is senior leaders. So the Emergers and the Advances, they're in the same workshops together. And that is really important for Emergers to understand Advances, how they're working. They get to see how their mind works in reflective activities, how they're going to tackle a problem. So they're not just learning from me, they're actually peer social learning, which is really important. So they have a series of workshops. They have also as well their reflective toolkit. It is something I'm very, very proud of that I wrote. It's a huge toolkit about lots of different activities to reflect on themselves as a leader. And what we really need more than anything, when we talk about leadership skills, we talk about active listening or strategic thinking or interpersonal skills. Very, very rarely does the most important skill of all, critical thinking and awareness, come up. And that is everything. So if you don't have that, you can't unlock all the others. And it's really important that we develop leaders that have this skill so they can look at the outside world, so they can see how it's changing and go, oh, we need to reskill, we need to pivot, we need to move. This is quite an interesting problem. Let me unpack it. Instead of just consuming, because we're in the position now with technology, we consume. I don't need to think about anything. I don't have to know how to get anywhere. My sat nav will tell me. I don't have to know what time of the day it is. My phone will tell me. I don't need to know what the weather is outside. Google, Siri, insert Alexa, etc. will tell me. We have stopped the ability to think. And so I want my people to think by themselves, reflect, work it out, and they can apply that skill to everything. So as a skill goes, super important. So they have their reflective toolkits, so they can understand themselves. They have their manager communities inside QS, really important as well, that they build those kinds of bonds and understandings. They have LinkedIn learning pathways as well, because we have LinkedIn learning at QS, so they can understand the logistics of how to do things. So disciplinary processes, or having difficult conversations, or coaching and mentoring a team member. All these different pathways are in there. And they're applying those skills practice-based, and then they're using all their reflective skills inside the workshops for reflective activities. So emergers and advancers do this together. And then, rather excitingly, when they are in advance, so they can go complete all of emerge, and then they can go into advance once they've completed emerge. I won't stop them. That's super important. You don't stop and go, come back when you're a manager and you'll do advanced. You can keep going. I am more than happy for you to keep going. And so when they get through to advanced, they do all of those things. All the advancers do all of those things. Plus they do 360 feedback inside Paycor, which is a platform that we use inside QS, to understand how the world sees them as a leader. That is really important. Again, they use their reflective journal to reflect upon it and understand it a little bit more. And then they also do, rather excitingly, we brought in a company called MetaSim, which is one of the most immersive AI experiences of my life. And they get to practice with AI avatars situations one-to-one on difficult conversations, feedback, coaching, mentoring, leadership skills, in the safety of a role play in which it's not awkward, because we're not in a room and everybody's watching them. It feels very, very real, because we live in a world of Teams and Zoom these days. So having someone on screen and having a conversation now feels second nature. And they get feedback from that, and they get to be assessed on that. Once they've completed all of that, then they can go through to Propel. And Propel we do in conjunction with Loughborough University. And then they learn about messy and sticky problems. And they actually get to take in groups problems, opportunities, issues, exciting ventures that our own CEO has earmarked for Propellers to look at. And real life, they have to go out there in QS, talk to the stakeholders, understand the problem, come up with ideas. And then Dragons Den style, they present it back to their key stakeholders of the C-suite, which we call the ELT inside QS. And we get to assess them on that. So they're actually doing something real all the time, all the way through. And an emerger can go all the way through that program to the end, gather all those skills and development. So when an opportunity comes up at QS, they've got all those skills. And even if they don't want to become leaders and they go, do you know what, that isn't for me, we've given them critical thinking skills, active listening skills, great communication skills. These are all skills that everybody should have. Now, this program is completely optional. It's not mandatory in any way, but 14% of our QS population is on this program right now on one of those tiers, which is a huge percentage of our workforce, which is absolutely fantastic. As a result, we're currently tracking the data right now. QS had its most profitable year in its 34 history this year. So that was very exciting for us. We also had our highest ever retention year. So people are staying. We have quite low turnover, but it was at its lowest. It's at its highest retention. That's exciting. People are seeing the opportunities that they can have and doing their reflections, and then coming through, and they get to have executive coaching with myself. We get to work out, what's your world domination strategy? What do you want to be when you grow up? Using all their reflective skills to work out what it is they want. And then they get an appetite and a hunger for that personal development. And then we're getting more and more people going, oh, I'm interested in this, or, oh, I've learned that. And we're getting many more managers coming to us and going, oh, I really want a team building day with my team to tackle this problem. And they're really seeing the benefits of learning and development. So for me, that is probably one of the most exciting things I think I've ever done. And yet it's in LinkedIn Learning, SharePoint, Teams presentations and workshops, webinars on Teams. It is very, very tangible technology, and yet it's delivering us fantastic results. So that I'm very proud of. So yeah, that's my example.
Great. Those two were like some great examples. And I really believe that even our listeners are going to take so much insight from those stories, and they can implement in their own challenges, whatever they face in their respective organization across industries. So, but any success stories is not complete unless we discuss the elephant in the room. So, Teresa, to you first. While you were talking about the success story, you talked about you were collecting a lot of data points, but once you have implemented that, how do you exactly measure the effectiveness and the return on investment of these programs? Like, what matrices do you find the most valuable when it comes to sort of assessing the impact on your employee performance or the organizational growth? What would be those matrices, and how do you kind of justify the ROI?
Yeah, with the example that I've given, those were more largely internal data points. So it was around employee engagement surveys. It was looking at different managers in different departments, because we've got a lot of data that showed there were differing levels of people management that were going on in the organization. But it's also changing some of those reward mechanisms, because often people aren't rewarded for people development. Managers are rewarded for ticking the box and getting things done, but they've got to get that done largely through people. But that's often, as Hannah was talking about earlier on in this conversation, around the performance management and the learning objectives being kind of reverse. And I think that's it can often be similar with the data. So it's looking at the things at the outset. And a lot of what we did at E.ON with our programs, we did scoping. So we would scope with our stakeholders. And if the scoping document didn't have viable metrics linked to strategic objectives, then the intervention would not happen. So we were very, very strict and had an HR change board, and we didn't block things. It met on a weekly basis. So there was no blockage in the system. But business people and HR people sat on that change board, and they decided based on the metrics that were presented whether or not scopes would get through. And we'd also be looking at the resource available. We'd be looking at what delivered more to the organisation, be it on different criteria, be it customers, because customers were always number one really at E.ON. I would say health and safety, and then customers were our number two priorities, and taking care of the staff. So very much welfare and things like that were really important. But yeah, the metrics would be what we would look at from the outset. So there weren't projects that would get through unless they had clear strategic linked metrics attached to them.
Great, great. Hannah, what about you? Like, what are your top matrices that you look into while you kind of create these initiatives, or you would have implemented those? And how do you justify the ROI?
Yeah, so the type of data I gather goes back to the piece that I was saying at the top, and the importance of understanding the business. You've got to have a collection of data that your CEO is interested in. And then there's the learning data. So they're two very different pieces. And I think a lot of learning people get really excited about, completion rates and engagement rates, and they're all fantastic, but they are not what your CEO loses sleep about. So you have to measure the things that they're losing sleep over. And these are things like, organizational development and growth, literal return of investment on the bottom line. So if you're training sales staff, is the gestation period shorter with clients? Are you signing them quicker? Are you getting them faster through the pipeline? Therefore, are you having more sales a year, etc., etc. These are the things that the CEO loses sleep about. You have to capture those as an absolute priority. Otherwise, you don't have the biggest ambassador in the room, which is your CEO, in your corner going, learning is the greatest thing that you've ever seen, because look what it's done for the business. And you've got to move it from being a nice to have to a need to have. So you've got to understand business. So it's things like, for example, like I was saying about gestation periods and closing contracts, literal return of investments on the bottom line. So profitability, growth, you're looking at lower retention rates. So you've got less people leaving the business, which of course is a cost saving, but also as well, people are happier. That leads then to employee satisfaction surveys. You've got things like productivity increases, number of innovations to market, growth of market share. You've got to track those. A lot of people go, how the hell do I do that? Never done that before. But that's where you've got to talk to the business leaders inside the organizations about how they're tracked and how you can connect the dots. So that is priority number one before you even looked at the learning design and if people are happy with it. Because if it's not doing those things, the CEO is never going to back you in the future. So you've got to look at that as an absolute priority. And so the next piece to look at is looking at it with line manager. like lenses on. Do they have better skills? Is there better job application? Is the efficiencies there in terms of time now, productivity inside the teams? Is everything working better inside the teams? So if you've gone out and you've upskilled loads of people in the use of a particular platform, is their working day-to-day life better? Is the manager seeing that this is actually worthwhile? So you've got to capture that at like an operational level. And then you've got to look at, what did the learners think? How did the learning designs work? So you're looking at things like different kinds of responses and surveys and feedback in terms of, did this work? Did you enjoy it? Let's look at the completion rates. If you've got platforms that you can look at the migration and engagement data in, take a look at that, see where the drop-off points are. So you can be capturing multiple different types of metrics. And that sounds like a lot of hard work. And some people are like, oh, data is not my thing. But that's where you can actually upskill and reskill yourself, you know, and you've got to put yourself as an L&D person at the front of that L&D queue, because otherwise, and I've said it 1,000 times before, and I will literally die on this hill, that good L&D makes a company and bad L&D breaks a company. And if you don't have good L&D at the core, if you're not tracking that data, if you're not showing its worth, that company will fold in time. We've seen in the UK, especially even companies that Teresa and I've worked with over the years, fold. 100 years in the business, they've folded. And it's because you can see these errors constantly happening in the business where they're not being reflected. They're not horizon scanning. They're not applying their skill sets. They're not upskilling and reskilling their workforces fast enough. And you can see it time and time again. So these metrics, understanding the business of your business, is the key to then getting the stakeholder engagement that you need, the more money for the resources for the next year. You know, let's do it bigger. Let's have a bigger platform. Let's do it in this field and have that push and pull. So you've got to have all of those kind of metrics before you then look at operational metrics, and then you look at learning design metrics, and then, you know, learner satisfaction, learner engagement metrics. So there's kind of like 4 different areas that you've got to collect your data in, and then look at it and go, what does this mean? And then work with those stakeholders to unpack that meaning, and then you've got your narrative.
Amazing. I think to our audience, it will be like, if you have to sum it up altogether, data is your key to go to any successful L&D initiative, as both Teresa and Hannah said today. So yeah, perfect. Those, I feel, were some amazing examples and some amazing insights to the whole topic of upskilling and reskilling your workforce. And I mean, thanks to both of you for actually joining in and sharing those stories with us. I'm truly grateful for that. And yeah, perfect. Any parting thoughts you have before we end the show?
Yeah, I think on this data and metrics question, it's brought to mind something that Charles Jennings talks about. If you're familiar with if you know Charles Jennings, if you're not, then please do look him up and follow his work. And he talks about when he was in an organization and he had joint accountability with, I think it was his like vice president or president of sales and marketing. They had joint accountability for those business metrics and those business goals. I think that would be more beneficial if there was a lot more of that in learning and development, with that joint accountability and less emphasis, as Hannah has said, on the bums on seats or the virtual bums on seats or whatever loose kind of vanity metric, performance metric that you're using, and real great tangible business metrics. Because I hear myself saying it as well, talking about L&D and the business separately you're all one team. You're serving the business. Yeah. And that also is probably why I'm not a fan of an L&D strategy. Your strategy is the business strategy.
It's basically L&D should be alongside the strategy and not like having L&D strategy separately.
I think it's a distraction from getting stuff done that needs to get done, where there's too much navel gazing. It's just go and get the work done, work out what needs to be done and do it.
True, totally agree to it. And perfect. Thanks a lot. And a huge shout out to both of you, Hannah and Teresa, for your invaluable insights. To our listeners, remember, investing in your workforce skill is an investment in your organization's future. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories on the Digital Adoption Show, available on all major podcasting platforms. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to keep the learning going. Thank you, Hannah and Teresa. We had a lovely time hosting you.